This is one I found really interesting, that it's called the German rationale for a successful outcome of invading the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. One of the things I introduce in when I'm talking in the lecture from this book is to compare the two nations that are going to be the most significant combatants in World War II, the USSR and Germany, and its German allied nations. And I used time zones. The Union of Soviet Socialist Republics has 11 time zones. Germany has 1. It's either summertime or wintertime. We have our 4. Significant. But just think of that one time zone worth of population base assaulting a nation with 11. It's an astonishing comparison if you look at it that way. And then you can go through the demographics and population base and that sort of thing, and it just makes it interesting. But so with that kind of wondering, like, why would even anybody in their right mind, it's like Rhode Island attacking Alaska. It has all the rationale as the common sense are trying to do that. Okay, let me jump into this, and then we'll go through the 6 reasons that Germans came up with. I think they all have merit. That's what the interesting thing is. The German decision to invade the USSR has many facets: political, economic, racial, military, historical. The previous invaders, Charles XII in 1708 and Napoleon I in 1812, all pointed the way to a successful invasion from the West, but only if the invader avoided the errors they made. With the third invader, Germany under Hitler in 1941, all the lessons learned were ignored via Nazi nationalistic and racial fervor, assumed racial superiority, and their recent military successes in the West. So, with the daunting challenge of successfully attacking and defeating a country so much larger than itself, how did the political and military of the Third Reich convince itself that it could do what no other invader had done in the past? First one, Russia's poor performance in the 1939-1940 Winter War against Finland. And there's a comparison with Rhode Island and Alaska. If you looked at the population of Finland in 1940 and the population of the USSR and its extended nations in 1940, it is as an incredible disparity. That war went on for like 3 times longer than it should have, because the Finns just never gave up. It was an interesting thing because the Finns finally, with a country of 4 million and Russia with 136 million at that point in 1940, it was just a matter of attrition and time before something was had to give. The second reason, the extensive organizational restructuring of the Red Army begun in 1940 was still incomplete in 1941. Okay? And that's strictly the military. The next one, and what's more popular that people have heard about, is the military and political, this is number 3, the military and political purges that were being conducted by the NKVD, which would eventually decapitate the Red Army's experienced and skilled command structure, and was seen by the German Army, and actually did, as weakening the new Red Army. So you see how these things are starting to fall into line about the Germans are going, well, maybe this is not as risky or undoable as we think it might be. Number 4, if you remember in 1939, September 1st, World War II started with the German invasion of Poland. Okay? You all recall that, maybe you don't, that Germany did not occupy the entirety of Poland, just the first western 2/3 of it. On September 17th, 1939, the Red Army quietly occupied the eastern third of Poland. Okay? So the buffer nation of Poland that was separating these two totalitarian nations of vast aggression intent and expansionism lost their buffer nation, and now they're facing each other eyeball to eyeball. A very, very tripwire type dangerous situation that all it takes is one spark, especially the mistrust that already exists between them. Okay, the forward position, number 4, finish with that one. The forward positioning of the Red Army in newly occupied Poland on September 17th, blah, 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 just what I talked about. So there's another reason. Number 5, and this was something that may be concocted by Germany to rationalize within the military, Germany's fear of Russia attacking first. That was a very, very big concern, especially some of the military in the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the German High Command, is that now they're so close, and the Red Army was so much bigger than the German army at that time. They're much closer to Berlin than they've ever been before. Remember, Berlin sits in the eastern quadrant of even present-day Germany, much closer to its traditional enemies from the east. The one is timing. This is kind of interesting. That was put together myself and a couple of bloggers in London. A delay in attacking Russia meant that by 1942 or 1943, at the latest, the nations which Germany was at war or would most probably be at war, based on their pre-war relationships with and trade agreements with England and the United States, would already be ready for war. In 1941, none of these nations were ready for war. Germany was. Do you wait until all three are ready, or at the same time, or do you remove the greatest and closest threat, that one to the east? And that was the final rationale, that it's not so much of Russia attacking first, is that if we can beat them to it, way before all the Allies had finished, especially the United States. If you're not aware, in 1940, way before Pearl Harbor, the United States Army was the same size as the army of the nation of Romania.
Wow.
It doesn't say very much, does it? Remember, there was isolationism. We're not going to be drawn into another European war, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Depression had lingering effects on the military as far as budget reductions. So that had a lot to do with it. And so when you have this, Germany had really basically, we don't have to worry about anybody in the West. The French have been terrified by World War I and having a repeat of losing another generation. England was still economically depressed after the Depression in World War I. The United States has that huge ocean between us and them, so we can turn our backs into them and look at that big, worrisome neighbor to the east. Any question on those 6 rationales? All of a sudden, it does look... Sir?
Do you think this is like kind of off topic a little bit, but do you think that the Germans, had they not invaded Yugoslavia before, or in early 1941, and delayed the attack, do you think they could have knocked Russia out of the war that year?
The question is, if the Germans had not delayed their attack due to going south into Yugoslavia as well as Greece and other nations, that was one of the greatest blog questions that you will talk about any bunch of Eastern Front military authorities. And everybody that has ever played a war game about Germany attacking Russia, you always had a roll of the die because you had to choose 3 weather start dates. And that was part of the problem. They thought, well, if the German army was not ready, and the higher number of panzer divisions were still examining their needs as far as captured Czech equipment as well that came out of there, and using them into the German army. What turns out to be so much more of a weather factor, it turns out, in the late summer of 1941, late spring, between April and early June, Poland was beset with heavy rainstorms. It was very, very flooded. The preparations of the German divisions moving from France, which they had just recently succumbed in the summer of 1940, there were not, Stalin's intelligence operation personnel were picking up information that the panzer divisions of the Reich are on the move, and they're not moving west, they're not going north, they're not going south, they're heading east, and they're not stopping in the Reich for repair and reconditioning, they're going into Poland. And neurotic Mr. Stalin, and he had a right to be at that point, he said, well, there must be a reason why they're coming into Poland. And there was some rationale given to that. But it turned out to be not so much of the delay as far as other operations that were going on. A lot of it was due to weather. Yeah. That's why it's here.